This is the I Read Comic Books podcast. I am your host, Mike Rappin, and with me this week, two fantastic human beings, Kait Scotchless.
Hello.
And Kait Lamphere.
Hi.
Thank you both for joining me this week. I'm very excited. I'm stupendously excited to talk about this week's topic. But before we get into that, I've got a couple quick reminders for folks. Just so you know, if you haven't been listening to the show for a long time, we are taking the month of July off as we do every summer. We're going to be off for 5 weeks straight. So get ready for 5 weeks of minisodes and everything. But we will be back in August to talk about all sorts of regular stuff. But just so you know, we're going to be off for 5 weeks. So there's not like a big emergency. It's just a summer break. And the other thing I want to call out, we are doing a Discord hangout on July 10th at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So if you are not already on the Discord, you should go join that today. Send me a message to let me know that you're on, where you came from, and you can come and hang out with us, like literally audible, talk to us with your voice kind of hangout in Discord. And we're going to have a great time. Who knows? We might play some games or just talk about comics, all sorts of stuff. It's a wild time every time we get together. So we hope to see you all there. But yeah, let's get into this. As I said, it's the podcast, it's a regular week. It feels like we've been on and off nonstop, so I just don't even know how to run the show anymore. But anyways, I'm going to ask the question I ask every single week, which is, how have you been and how have comic books been? Let's start with you, Kait Scotchless.
I've been good. I absolutely adored the book we're talking about this week and spent a lot of time reading that this week. So I haven't actually read a lot else other than this big old OGN we're going to talk about. But I have been back on Webtoon a bit, and I absolutely live for updates to Poorly Drawn Lines, which is, they had their own website, but they moved it, or rather, I guess it's on both their website and Webtoon. So it's by Riza. That's like the whole thing that's posted, but they're so perfect. I have some of the books. I should have looked to see the full name of the person on there, but I didn't. But Poorly Drawn Lines is the best, like the funniest little comics where everyone's an animal, and it's like each one works on its own, but also they're a series, so they kind of build on each other to be funnier sometimes because you kind of get the characters.
We talked about this. This is one of our Goodreads Book of the Months, I want to say earlier this year, wasn't it?
Drawn Lines was?
Yeah.
We don't remember that at all, but okay.
Yeah, we read the first volume of like the collected edition of this. It was a lot of just strip comics, right?
They're so good. And then I also have started reading a new one that's online on Webtoon called Flora. It's a fantasy comic that's also crime/mystery. And it just started, so it comes out every Tuesday right now, and it takes really good advantage of that format of the scrolling, the vertical scrolling on the phone, and it's about a boy named Ollie who has the secret, but now he has to trust his friends, and time's running out, and so they're like trying to help him, but also trying to find out the truth behind his problem to like try and save him. And it's very cute in the sense that it's about kids. I like the art style and colors, especially the color on my phone pops really nicely. And it feels more comics like that I'd get in a volume than comics that I usually read on Webtoon, which I like because I do prefer usually the kind of reading image trades is like my bread and butter. And it feels like it could be reformatted into that if it wasn't in this vertical format. So,
gotcha.
How about you guys?
Yeah, Kait, what about you? What have you been up to? How have you been? What have you been reading?
Good. I've been reading a lot of comics, which is great. I've been reading a lot of them outside because it's nice out when it's not too hot. So that's been a great difference, I guess, than reading inside all winter. I finally read a book called May that I picked up from C2E2 2 years ago. The writer and artist is Jean Ha. Rose McClain and Wesley Hartman did the colors, and Xander Cannon did the letters. I was mostly just attracted to this booth at C2E2 because of this giant cutout behind the creator of a girl that's dressed like a revolutionary soldier or maybe a pirate, but she was holding these two gold axes. And I basically haven't been disappointed that that's the reason I picked this book up. So the backstory is about a girl named Abby who disappeared 7 years ago and just kind of like shows up again. And her sister and her dad have been worried about her all this time. And it turns out that she's been in a magical world where she saved a whole lot of people and made a bunch of alliances and enemies. And she goes to her sister named May, who the book is titled for, and she has to take her back to the magical world to save their now kidnapped father. But a bunch of Abby's enemies from that world show up and destroy their hometown in Indiana first. So they just like destroy a bunch of stuff and then they disappear.
Yeah, that may be the most interesting thing to happen in Indiana.
The world building and the other dimensions so far is great. The fantasy races are very imaginative, and well, like, it's not a high-tech society. There is a whole mad scientist faction where there's some really unique weapons and cyborgs. One of them has like 5 heads, but it's a mechanical body. It's really interesting to see what this creator came up with. There are a lot of references to Indiana culture and science fiction pop culture. Especially like the card game called the Euchre that I don't like, but everybody in Michigan and Indiana loves it. Right. And then there was a whole bunch of Doctor Who references. And for the most part, I really enjoyed all of these references, except that sometimes like they would be a little bit too one after the other. And it was like, okay, I get it. Like, and I'm really glad that I read the back matter, because as it turns out, a lot of the names that I couldn't figure out how to pronounce are actually Czech. And I really appreciated the pronunciation glossary that was included in the back of the book for this. And then also it was a really unique way, I thought, to show the presence of other like Earth humans that wasn't like, they aren't all just American in this fantasy book that wandered into this other dimension. There's like, there's references to all these different cultures, and then a lot of the names are Czech. Volume 1 is on Hoopla, and then I was looking for Volume 2. I couldn't find Volume 2, but they do have issues 7 through 10. I don't know if that is the rest of the series
when that happens on Hoopla, or they'll have like Volume 1, 2, and 5 or something.
Right. So I'm hoping that that's the rest of the story, because the first volume that I picked up is definitely not the whole story. It doesn't even feel like it's a whole arc. It kind of ends on a like, okay, we're here in this fantasy world. These are our goals. These are our allies and enemies. Like, it sets it up. Like, it's a really good like midpoint in a story, but it's not the whole story. So I hope the rest of it's on Hoopla.
Well, yeah, I mean, this sounds really cool. I've always enjoyed Gene Ha's art, so this sounds really fun.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons I picked it up. It's because I liked the art so much.
Very cool. Well, for me, I've been all right. I have had like a nonstop week of weird work where all I want to do at the end of the day is read One Piece, which I have been. And for those of you who are keeping track at home, I am just past chapter 500. I just read 502, which means that if the book continues to come out on a weekly basis or a bi-weekly basis, I have to read like 28 chapters a week. I don't know. I'm going to catch up before chapter 1000 comes out, but it's happening. But I did actually read some other stuff when I wasn't getting my toenails painted by my wife because she decided out of the blue the other night that she wanted to, I don't know, wash my feet and then paint my toenails, which was like very nice. And I am very thankful for that. And now I have these beautiful purple toenails. But I did sit down and read Bog Bodies by Declan Shalvey with art by Gavin Fullerton and Rebecca Nulty. It's a really short OGN about crime gone wrong and inevitability. I talked about this on our Discord book club that we've been doing like every 3 weeks. So if you're not on that, I highly suggest you come and hang out and talk comics with us. But ultimately, I felt like this was an okay graphic novel. I think coming out of Declan Shalvey's previous book, Savage Town, this book was a bit of a flop in comparison because I felt the story lacked a lot of meat. It was straightforward to the point. I understood what was happening. Like, there was no confusion. And the suspense in the story of this kid being chased by people because he had screwed up was completely there from beginning to end. But that being said, by the end of it, it kind of just ended. There was no real turn. There was a twist on the overall story, but on the whole, like, as far as the characters that were involved, there didn't seem to be anything consequential outside of death, which maybe sounds like me being numb to the idea of a character dying, but I was kind of waiting for a big turn in the story to reveal something, and that never came. And maybe that's just me coming from Savage Town, but I felt like this book was just okay. Like, I would give this a 3 out of 5 compared to Savage Town, which I think I rated a bit higher. So yeah, I would say I would recommend this if you want like a quick kind of dark crime story to get through. And I wouldn't even say this is fully crime because it's more about character exploration. And I said like death and inevitability. But yeah, I read it. It was okay. The other thing I want to talk about really quick, I read The Girl from the Other Side, Volume 4. This is by Nagabe. I talked about this on the show before. It's a story about outsiders and people that live on the inside of the city walls called insiders. And this one little girl who, for some reason, is very, very special. She's not really the focal character of the story, but she is the central piece of the story. And by Volume 4, a lot of things have changed. The lore of the story about what outsiders are, these beasts that are cloaked in shadow that somehow don't remember who they are, but they have distinct personalities. There's a lot to explore in it, and I don't want to reveal anything because I feel like after Volume 1, the entire thing is spoilers. So, yeah, I really recommend this series. It's beautiful. The one last thing I'll talk about is I read Hiraku no Go, Volume 1. This is written by Yumi Hoda with illustrations by Takeshi Obata, and you may recognize that name as the artist on the series Death Note. So if you like the art in Death Note, you can read stuff by that same artist before they honed their skills, I would say. But nonetheless, this is a story that's about ghosts and the board game Go, like the ancient game of Go. And there's a lot of very standard shonen manga pieces to this book, but I think that for a book that came out in, I think, 1999, this book really doesn't fall down too many of the paths of something like a Pokemon or a Yu-Gi-Oh, where everything is just, I'm the greatest and blah, blah, blah. I think they twist the idea of a protagonist prodigy, if I'm saying that word right, and use this idea of a ghost person who has all of this knowledge about the game Go, to allow our protagonist to kind of succeed. I'm not doing a good job of explaining this book, but it's really, really fun, and I couldn't stop myself from reading by chapter 3. Like, the first 2 are a bit hard to get through, but by chapter 3, I was sucked in, and I had to force myself to stop at the last chapter of the volume as I was reading on the Shonen Jump app, because it's so compelling. And they really, really drive forward this idea of the main character, Hiraku, not wanting to play Go. But by the end of the volume, he's like, hold on a second, I think that there's something to this. While this ghost character who's like helping him play and beat all of these people that are very good at Go, saying, no, see, there's more to this game. And I think there's a lot to the story. And I know that it's pretty short. 23 volumes is short in my mind compared to... It's so short in comparison to fucking
It's barely there. It's like you blink and it's over.
Exactly. My whole bar of understanding for what the length of a manga series should be has been totally broken by, Naruto and One Piece and Bleach and stuff. And I'm only reading the big 3. Of course, everything seems really short.
It doesn't last for over a decade. Did it even run?
That's Kait. You're right inside my brain. Get out of it. But yeah, so I read that, and it was pretty good. I think I'm definitely going to keep reading that when I'm not binging through One Piece and catching up on, the recent chapters of My Hero Academia, Time Ghost Paradox, Ghost Rider Paradox. You guys out there, I don't know what it's called, but it's fantastic. Anyways, I'm going to stop talking because I'm going to ask you guys about what books you're excited for this upcoming week.
Mike.
Yes.
The Girl from the Other Side is one of the only manga series that I've really enjoyed, and I wish so badly that I could read up to the point you're at, but with the interlibrary loan system shut down right now in Michigan, I can't do that because my library doesn't have any of it, which is sad. But I'm wondering if there's a reason why you feel like manga is all you're reading right now versus a mix like you typically do.
I mean, recently I don't know, with comics being paused, I was just kind of binging things. And so I was just still binging stuff. I'm way behind on all of my single issues. I read a handful, I read Outer Darkness and Chew crossover. I read Die, but it's been really hard to find drive to sit down and read Western books. I don't know why. There's something about manga that's just so easy. Say that again, Kait?
There's more reading maybe in the American comics?
No, manga, One Piece is so full of dialogue. It's gross. But it's this idea of a consistent ongoing story that I think really keeps pulling me back in. Whereas a lot of these other books, I don't know, it's given me a lot of push to cull back my pull list even more. But I'm worried that I'm going to do it to a point where I'm barely even reading any Western books. And I don't know why. Manga, for some reason, is just really, really compelling. And I also think that part of that is like, I'm definitely more driven to OGNs and limited series and stuff now in Western books, because I feel like their approach to stories in the same way that I feel like a lot of these alternative non-shonen style manga that I'm reading are, right? Like The Girl from the Other Side is not a book that I think you could get published here in the United States at a major publisher, even in a Big Ten publisher. It's too slow. It's slow. I don't even know how else to describe it, but I find that so refreshing because it's such a different change and there's so much to explore, but that slow burn of a story takes a lot of trust. Whereas here in the United States, I feel like Western books, they need a punch in the first issue. Otherwise, you're not getting anything, whether that's a physical punch or a major twist in the story.
Yeah. No, I know.
I feel like that's part of the problem. But that is also that also is a problem, not of just the industry of the people creating the books, because I think that there are people out there creating these stories. That's why these OGNs exist. Like On a Sunbeam, I think when we're gonna talk about that later in the episode, is a perfect example of something that I think works in that same vein. But the problem is getting it published as an ongoing series is tough because of the release schedule that I think comics have here in the United States. And I'm not asking for, a weekly release schedule like they have in Japan, but I think that helps keep people hooked on your story. But yeah, we can, I don't know, we can talk about it more. Honestly, I know we talked about this a bunch on the show. And it's just, I find myself falling into manga as a fallback because there's so much of it, and it's really easy to digest compared to, I don't know, some Western comics. There's just a lot in your face.
Yeah, no, I was just curious for you personally why that was a thing when you can't read one. Why what makes the manga easier or more digestible or whatever? But you explained that really well.
Yeah, I mean, we could go into this more, but my personal take is I just find reading manga a lot easier. For some reason, at least recently. Yeah. But I mean, that being said, I did pick up like those Western books. Like I picked up Outer Darkness / Chew, that crossover, and I picked up Die, and those books are cake because I'm so invested in those stories. Mm-hmm. So I think it's also like just a level of investment. And yeah, I don't know, X books. I read all my X books, whether I like them or not. But I'm just behind on some stuff. But anyways, let's talk about comic books that are coming out this upcoming week. Comics are dropping on July 1st, 2020. This is the only week we'll be talking about comics in July, unfortunately, because we're taking that break. But let's see what everyone's excited for. I'm going to kick it over to Kait Lamphere to start.
Yeah, I'm excited for actually two different books that are both from First Second. They're part of a new series called History Comics, and the titles are Great Chicago Fire by Alex Groudon and Kate Hannigan, and The Roanoke Colony by Chris Schweitzer. And I had read The Donner Party by Nathan Hale a few months ago, and I ended up doing some research to find more books that are in that same vein, like these historical retellings of real events that may or may not include fictional characters. And these two titles end up popping up. And aside from just being this like nonfiction retelling, the Roanoke Colony description makes it sound like a mystery that you get to solve while you're reading the book, because the Roanoke Colony, like, it is a mystery. It's a historical mystery. And while some people feel like that's been solved, maybe it really has been solved, I don't know that much about it, which is why I want to read this book. There was a lot of elements, like historically, about where these people might have disappeared to. So I really feel like making this into some kind of historical based mystery book is a really good idea. And I'm interested to see how they manage that in this series that seems to kind of be geared toward children. And then the description for the Great Chicago Fire says that the book follows a brother and sister team that end up finding a puppy and rescue it from the fire as well as themselves. Oh, no. So basically what I'm saying is that both of these things have more going for them than just being two cool new books from First Second. Although if that's all they were, I'd still be into it, because I've said before that I'm constantly impressed by First Second. And then I also have this affection for nonfiction comics that I've never been able to grasp in prose books, unfortunately, for some reason. So I'm really interested to see how the series is going to be received by the market, and if we'll end up getting more books like this out of the comic book industry.
So are these full-length OGNs, like 100+ pages, or are they more like a comic issue that you pick up?
They're OGNs. Yeah, they're self-contained.
Wow.
Yeah, that's pretty much how First Second puts out books.
Okay.
Yeah, for the most part. What about you, Kait? What are you excited for this upcoming week?
Well, you
or
guys,
in the upcoming weeks, I should say.
You may not have heard of this little publisher called First Second, but they put out a lot of good stuff. And it turns out they have a new Box Brown book coming out as well. So I also picked an OGN. This one's called Child Star, and it's a fictional documentary-style graphic novel about this kid growing up in the spotlight. He's like in a sitcom and stuff like that, and how it like robs them of their like an actual childhood. So like I looked at the description and I looked at the previews pages and I'm like, am I ready to be heard again? Yeah, I am. So that's where I am at. To be completely honest though, we'll probably hold off on this one for the library. Having the OGN price tag attached is a little much right now, but it is only $20, which I thought was really cheap for a First Second book.
Yeah.
So who knows? Maybe I'll get desperate and get it. It depends on how quickly. I don't know if libraries are like purchasing books right now because their budgets are all kind of up in the air with how devastating financially to a lot of towns this pandemic stuff has been. So.
Interesting, yeah.
Yeah, I know my friend who's a librarian can't, like, this is the time of year for school libraries that they're usually putting in like tons of orders. And that's like a big part of your job over the summer as a librarian. You do like the inventory and then a bunch of ordering, but they can't order anything right now because there's no budget. So everything's completely frozen on hold. This is for a high school library, but apparently that's like happening all over the place. And they're all just going like kind of making the list, but like as a wish list versus actually being able to order things. So point being, I might end up buying this if that kind of thing is happening at my local library as well.
Gotcha. I'm very excited for this book. I know that Box Brown, he was actually publishing the majority, if not all of the pages of this book on his Patreon for a while. And I was following a little bit of it. And I know he posted like a tweet thread like a long while back of some pages of it. And it looks really, really cool.
Yeah,
like, I mean, his style is fantastic.
Great, which isn't surprising because his stuff always looks great.
Yeah, I'm really excited to see him actually do something fictional, though. All of his previous works, if I'm not mistaken, with the exception of like, I think some zine stuff that he did have been all biographical or about something like a real life event or something like that.
This is like,
and this is this.
Yeah, like taking that same style of like the documentary style, but making it a fictional thing is an interesting next step for him, I thought, because it's still that very same style as storytelling, but he has to kind of fictionalize it, which is cool. And yeah, I'm excited for it. I'm more interested in this topic, I think, and like kind of the story aspect than I am some of the other topics he's done. So sure, I'm ready. How about you, Mike?
Same. I was gonna say I'm excited for this. I'm bummed that you picked it because I love me some Box Brown.
I did notice that I got to our planning Google Doc first, and I went to look that up. I'm like, haha, suckers. So
yeah, exactly. Well, I will actually talk about a single issue that is coming out. I'm excited for I Can Sell You a Body #4. This is from IDW by Ryan Ferrier and George Cambadias, I want to say. This book has been a wild ride of I don't know what the hell is going on sometimes, and spiritual weird character redemption arc thing where people are falling in love and committing crimes and there is sorcery involved. This book has been nonstop wild. I don't know what's happening. And I think I need to reread numbers 1 through 3 because it's been a while since I've read them with #4 coming out. But I've been enjoying what I've read so far, even if it's a little bit quick to the punch with a lot of things. I think this is a problem you get with some limited series where you need to, as I said before, like with single issue series, especially whether you get #1s, they've really got to slap you with something on that first issue in order to hook you. And this book did that, and I think it did it well. But by issue 2, I was like, whoa, we don't need any more of these slaps to the face. But as the series has gone on, I think that's kind of the thing of the book. And so I think rereading the first 3 issues and then getting into number 4 is going to do me a lot of favors to catch up and make sure that I understand everything that's going on and why all of these very sudden twists and turns have happened. And not that the book is complicated by any means, but there were some moments where I was like, I guess those characters decided to do that, and there doesn't seem to be any drive for it or any solid reasoning for it, but I guess we'll roll with it to see what happens. Because in some cases, when you see that happen in books and in comics, you will see like there'll be a follow-up and flashback that says, oh, the reason why this happened was, and it'll put it all in perspective. So I'm interested to see where we go with number 4. And yeah, the book is very, very pretty. I think Comedius' art is wonderful, and Ryan Ferrier is not a bad writer. So fingers crossed. We'll see if this book ends up well. I think this is the last issue of the series too, so that might also explain some of the pacing issues. But yeah, that's me. But yeah, let's take a quick break, and when we come back, we are going to be talking about our Goodreads Book of the Month, On a Sunbeam by Tillie Walden. This is a big one, folks, so strap in, and I hope you've read all 536 pages of this monster of a book. We'll be back in just a second. This week on I Read Comic Books, we are talking about our Goodreads Book of the Month, which was picked by our wonderful people over at the Goodreads group, On a Sunbeam by Tillie Walden, published by First Second Publishing, originally published as a webcomic that you can read all online right now on asunbeam.com. It's not the exact same thing as you're going to get in the OGN, but for the most part, the story is the same. So you can go and read that if you want to, and pause the episode and come back to that after you've gotten through all 20 chapters, all 536 pages of this OGN. And before we get into discussion, I want to warn you, full spoilers for this huge book called On a Sunbeam. If you haven't read it, we're going to spoil the whole ding-dang thing, so get ready. Kait, what did you guys think of this? This is a huge book. I'm so glad that the Goodreads folks picked it, but I want to know what you guys thought of this volume.
I loved it so much. It didn't feel huge to me because I just it was so good that I was losing track of time as I read it. I straight up missed a meeting because I didn't set an alarm because I didn't think I needed to, but I got so sucked in that I just read for 2 hours straight and then was like, oh shit. So I part of it is that it's just super up my alley in terms of things I like. I love space operas like A Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers. And it definitely reminded me a lot of that, the found family aspect. There's a spaceship crew. There's a lot of LGBT representation. There's an interesting interplanetary history and politics and stuff that are a part of it. But then it has the added piece of just gorgeous artwork to go with it. That it was everything. I love that everyone in this book is a girl, and there's just they're all into girls, and it's just girls being into girls and being in space and being awesome. I'm like, hell yeah.
I mean, this book I think is the quote on the back should be "The future is female," and that's it, right?
Yeah, is there a single male character in this book? I don't think there is.
No, I was trying to search through it, and I think someone on the Goodreads also brought that up. I could not find a single non-female character unless there was someone in the background. I mean, or non, I guess there were no male characters that we were aware of, right?
But there's there's no specifically male characters to my memory. So
yeah, Kait, what did you think? Lanfear.
So it is a truly gigantic book. I was very overwhelmed with the size of it, and yet I still read it in 2 sittings. So it's a very organic story. It's a very quick read, even though that there are so many pages. I don't think that there's really that much dialogue in comparison to the page count. I thought that this book was incredibly creative. All of the spaceships are koi fish.
Cool.
And the main occupation that we hear about in this story is building restoration in space. And some of it's on planets, and some of it's on asteroids, and some of it's just on buildings that seem to be floating by themselves. And that's enough of an occupation to make it, you need whole teams and whole companies that are organized to do these things. Mm-hmm. And that's really it informs a lot of backstory of this universe without spelling anything out. Like, it doesn't tell us that space was colonized and that there are all of these places that have been abandoned. They're now being changed into like schools and museums and such. Like, it's implied that there are tons and tons of people that travel through space that have used these buildings and are going to continue to use these buildings, but we don't see all of that. Like, it's so much world building, but it's so tight, and it doesn't really look all that much past our main characters, so that you get the story that you want with the people that the story is about.
Yeah, it's very character driven.
Yeah. And then there's the staircase, which seems, I think it's like an asteroid belt or a giant asteroid from what I could pick up. Yeah. But it's crumbling, so all of the people that live there have moved underground, and there are all these territory disputes, and it's just this whole, oh gosh, I don't know. That's just something that I haven't seen in science fiction necessarily.
Sure.
That just the idea that like this place has not been completely evacuated, even though it's falling apart. People are staying there because it's their home, and they're trying to make it work, even though, you know, the planet could crumble on them at any time.
Yeah, there's like a Wild West frontier kind of idea that I think that they establish in the story of, you know, there was this large, vast, unexplored parts of space that were habitable, and people just kind of journeyed out, even though it was against the law to go do that, and they settled, and then they decided, you know what? A lot of places were like, okay, we will abide by these laws and whatever, and we'll become part of the collective empire or whatever. I don't remember what they call it, except for the staircase. And then so the rest of the universe, the rest of this, you know, empire turned on them, and so they turned on the empire as well, saying there's going to be no connection between our two societies, which I thought was really interesting. But yeah, again, all of this stuff establishes this huge kind of implied sci-fi lore that I think in other stories they would spend pages, you know, dedicated to explaining, maybe not directly like with prose, but by, you know, character interactions, or someone has to do with working on the other side of the law. And instead we get a lot of that, and the majority of it very late in the story, after we've already established all of our characters. You know, we've established the ship, which was Char, Elma, Elliot, Audrey, and Mia are our protagonists, and then we get this other side of the story, which is Mia in school, who ends up meeting Grace, and she's got some other friends. Well, they're not really friends, but some other people that she interacts with, and it's interesting to see that even it's like the midway point. I think it's like chapter 10 is when we really start to get the world building lore, but that's so not important to the story that I think we've already been hooked into, which is Mia and Grace developing this relationship, and Mia working on this ship, and she's meeting and understanding all the people that work on the ship, like Char and Elma and Elliot have this very tight-knit thing, and Audrey, who is Alma's niece, is trying to like break into that, and she's like, well, we're all part of a crew, we should all be like friends and very, very tight and be a family essentially. And we see them grow before we even get any of the real lore of the story outside of their builders. They go fix things that will be turned into other things. I found that stupendous.
They did a really good job of you functionally know what Mia, who is just out of high school, knows, and you care about and see the things that she like cares about. And so like she doesn't care, like that she isn't thinking about the history of the universe kind of thing until that becomes relevant to the story. What she's interested in is trying to figure out the dynamics of the crew and her new job and stuff like that. And so I thought that was really good.
And she's clearly dealing with something, right? Like Mia comes into the story kind of, I don't want to say disheveled, but she comes into the story kind of being uncertain who she is. And she thinks that working on this ship, finding a position where she can do work and be a part of a crew will actually help fix whatever is wrong with her. And this, whatever that thing that is wrong with her, in heavy quotes there, it seems to be stemmed from this lost love that she had when she was in school. And we don't really know how that comes to be until the very like middle of the book, where we decide, or we hear about what actually happened in the final days before Grace left this school, and why Mia couldn't see her. And I was so impressed with how Tillie Walden focused on Mia's story, and she gave us like day by day, month after month of story between her and Grace and going to school and not doing well, but like their relationship kind of kept Mia sane. And then when Grace leaves and Mia finally explains, oh, there were other friends, there was other things, I actually did well in school. Like, I actually continued on, made new friends. I joined this Lux team, which is the sport in the game, which I want to get to in a second. And like, she talks about all this stuff, but that's not relevant to the story that we're focused on here. We're the story we're focused on is between her and Grace. And I love that kind of got breezed over in exchange for more story, more developing of Grace, understanding who she is, and then this ultimate change in direction of the story where they decide we're going to go find Grace. And I love the way that she did that.
Yeah.
But I don't know. This is, we're kind of going all over the story here, but the story is Mia trying to figure out how to essentially fill this void in her life. And it turns out by the end of the book, that she needs to go and say goodbye to Grace for whatever that means. She never got to say goodbye to Grace, and that's all she wants to do. And so, finding this family, they all learn to love each other. And with that, they decide we're going to journey to the scariest place and the most dangerous place in the universe or the galaxy. And just so that Mia can get this final goodbye with Grace. And the way that, it ends up is she tells Grace, come on, we're going to go. But along the way, we find, like, I found every single character in this story extremely compelling. Like, the more pages we spent with the crew, the more I fell in love with them. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you guys got the same vibe.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I really liked it. There were a few bits where I almost wanted it to go more in depth, like when, or be stretched out more, and which is crazy in a really long book. But there were parts of the story that definitely felt like an editor was like, no, we have to actually move here. Like,
sure.
So, like you said, with the Lux is super cool, and I did want more of that in the story.
Well, what? So, at one point in this story, they're playing this game Lux, or they're talking about this game Lux. Do we ever really figure out what exactly Lux is, other than you ride on these miniature koi fish and you have to collect planets or something from this
like
great
toss them
huge
into
stadium?
A dark void that's like all tunnels and stuff, and you ride around on these giant fish and catch them? I don't know.
Yeah.
Question mark?
I took it as a race. Like, you have to do this and then be the first person back or something.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Like,
I mean, the game does... Oh, go ahead, Kate.
I was just like, with Mia being such a character who's very much looking for a sense of belonging and looking for her people, and like Grace is in part so important because she's like the first person at the school that accepts Mia, and that like we just on like a one panel find out, oh yeah, Mia actually found that with the team and with other kids. But like, I'm like, oh, like joining the team would have been such a big deal, and like kind of finding her place in that. And I don't know, I'd be so on board with reading 500 more pages of this book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like there's a lot of story that seems very interesting, and it like 500 pages is a lot, but yet there could be, like you said, another 500 pages that I think would be just as compelling. And at the end of this book, Tillie Walden does say, thank you to my editor who took this kind of all over the place webcomic and turned it into an OGN. I have a feeling like if you read through the webcomic, there might be more, or there might be some more scattered thoughts and other things, which makes me almost want to go back and dig through it again. But it's a very long book. Like, I did really, really enjoy it, but at the end of the day, it was long. I had to read it in like 3 sittings just to get through it. Not that it was a slog. It's just a lot of book to read.
Yeah.
But can we talk about some of the art in this book? Can we talk about how fucking beautiful Tillie Walden's art, which is very, very flat, in my opinion, but still so mesmerizing. Like, there were pages where she did things that I was just like, holy fuck. This alone tells a story in just a few mixed panels where like you've got things bleeding and like water falling into each other. There was a page that has like a scene from the past and a scene from the present and a scene from another place, all like flowing together as if it was like 3 waterfalls falling into each other. And I just had to stop and stare at that page, which might have been part of the reason why it took me so long to get through this, because some of the splash pages that she did there, and they're all single pages, are just beautiful. Like I could print that out and put that on a wall.
Yeah, there's so many panels in this book that are like wall worthy. I was really interested. What did you guys think about the color work and the color palette that was chosen for this book? Because that was a definite choice, and I kept kind of going back and forth on if the line work is so great, but then I was like, I wonder why they chose these specific color palette and the more muted colors.
Yeah, the muted colors were one thing. I mean, I noticed, past typically has like a blue hue and present has a red, with the exception of Grace's flashback. But I thought that was a really interesting choice. And there's a moment where Grace and Mia run into each other near the end, and all of Grace's panels are in a blue hue and all of Mia's panels are in a red. And after that moment, that's where you start to see things with more blues and reds kind of coming together. But there's never any bright greens or bright yellows to add any more distinction. Everything was very much a blue and red, like heaviness. At least that's the way I see it. I'm sure there's some exceptions to that, but
kind of muted coloring. I was thinking of it in comparison to another space opera like Saga, where it's very bright colors, very vibrant. And this was the exact opposite direction from that.
Well, to me, I took a lot of that. And Kait, I want to also hear your thoughts, but I took a lot of that to be like, this story is very much it's slower. Right. It's very slow in comparison to a lot of other sci-fi books that you would see. And I think that the sci-fi is still very much there. It's still very, very present and prevalent throughout the whole book. But because this is a story, and it is by Tillie Walden, I think if you've seen her other work, she tends to use a lot of muted colors in general. Okay. But I think if you take like this kind of story and you try to put it with high neon colors, it would change the dynamic of everything. Yeah, right. I think all the muted colors were crucial because I think that Walden wanted to express a level of slowness to the story. Like these are real moments happening in real time. And for the most part, especially, people perceive things to be a bit slower. I guess that's a huge generalization. I mean, that's totally not true. But I think what she was trying to convey was that all of these moments should be perceived slower than what you're probably thinking would be happening, right? Because there's no real high-octane moments, with the exception of the end, when the ships are, wing is falling off while they're flying. But I think that she wanted to make sure that you were taking things slower. And I think that the muted color palette really, really does that. And it forces you to kind of sit back and breathe with the book rather than get your heart rate going and start, blazing through the pages.
I would also say with her line work that if it was brighter colors, it would be over the top psychedelic-y feeling, whereas the more muted colors made her kind of trippy line art less trippy, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, and I think in the few cases where she does use some brighter colors, particularly like yellows, I think those are supposed to be they're supposed to be specific, like awesome moments, right? When the big storm is coming into the school, there's this humongous vortex outside of the window that like everyone's just like, yeah, this is scary, like a thunderstorm. And I'm like, there's a cosmic void growing above you. Okay, everyone's calm for the most part. Mia was obviously upset. She was scared of it. But I thought that was really cool that she only really used those brighter colors. Even then, they're still muted in a lot of ways. They're more white than they are bright yellow, to convey like something awesome happening. And I think you'd find that to be consistent across the whole book.
What did you think of it, Kait?
Yeah, I definitely noticed color themes. I mean, the entire book has a color palette, but there are like specific colors that are specific to like a location. There's a specific tone of blue when Mia is in her boarding school. And then in the panels where she and Grace are together, there's a little like there's orange in almost all of them. And it gets more and more vibrant as they get closer and closer together. Like there's one big splash page, and I think it's like their first kiss or something. And that blue is still there, but then you have like the entire page has this brilliant orange to it. I mean, it's still muted, of course, but like a much larger portion of the page is in color than almost any of the rest of the book. And that's true of like these big wow moments. is that color is more pronounced in more of the pages in color. But otherwise, I mean, I like that most of the art is black and white, because I feel like black and white art really focuses you on the characters and on the actions and on the story, and gives you less focus on the art. But then the color and how pronounced the color is kind of draws your eyes to certain things, or gives you more of it kind of informs you on how emotional the characters are feeling. Like the more color there is, the more emotional they are. The exception seems to be the staircase. Like every time,
right,
whenever you're in the staircase, there's a lot of red and orange and yellow, and I feel like that was really effective because like the rest of the settings really aren't that colorful. And so the staircase, it's already weird. Like we already know from the backstory and everything that the staircase is a really unusual place. And, going back to how the planet is falling apart, it's very unique ecologically. Out in space, like this crazy asteroid ? Place. So I feel like it was a very good idea to give the staircase its own color palette and its own emphasis, and use that color really effectively. And then just like, if you look at almost every page with color, there's almost never more than 2 colors plus black on a page. For the most part, there's only 1 color plus black. And that's really interesting. I feel like that was really effective and probably really efficient when the creators were putting together, or creator was putting together this for a webcomic, because she probably only had to have, 2 colors up on her screen, right, and could just, use the fill button from a technical point of view. But then to print this must have been crazy expensive, or they must have had to find a really specific printer to do it, because you're still paying for 4 colors in a book, especially a book this big. So I'm really glad that they didn't make this grayscale or just black and white to print it.
Yeah, I agree. What did you guys think of the last third of this book, as the team kind of comes together, or maybe we should talk about the first 2/3 of the book first. We're exploring Mia and Grace's relationship. We're also exploring Mia kind of coming to know the rest of the team. I guess, what did you think about how the way that Walden approached the character development, and basically growing the group together?
I think there were more scenes towards the end that felt a little off for me than earlier on. So, and maybe that's because I knew the characters well enough at that point to have a sense of what I thought they would do, and then they didn't necessarily do that. So, for example, when Shar is put on leave because of the accident, and they get the new team leader assigned to them, they're all nasty to her, and there's the blow up moment where they all quit basically, and she's like, "Why have you been awful to me?" And to me, I had been reading most of that. Obviously she disrespects Elliot's pronouns, but then she's also taking Shar's place, and they clearly have no other outlet for the frustration of that, and of Shar being removed and having this new person put in. There's no other representative of the company there for them to kind of take it out on. And also feel very much, most of the characters are teenagers / young adults that were very attached to Shar as kind of a parental figure. And so this new team leader is new stepmom coming in, and they're like, "No, fuck you." And then when they have their big blow up quit moment, though, that isn't said at all. They explain it to her as the entire reason we were like this to you and hate you is because you didn't care about Elliot's pronouns. And I'm like, that's part of it. That's part of how you knew mom kind of sucked. But so much of it to me was it's very obvious to me that they would be reacting to kind of the replacement of this person they love, and taking it out on the only person that they have there. Because Char's not even on the ship. She's back home. And so they're missing her and all that stuff. And so that's one of just an example of scenes where by that point, I felt like I knew the characters well enough to have a sense of like, well, that doesn't make sense. So
yeah, they're definitely, I was also rubbed a little bit the wrong way by that scene as well, because it seemed like they needed another instance in the story where she did something that kind of disrespected the whole group.
Yeah.
And they explain it away, right? They definitely explain it away by saying, oh, you think this is just a job, and we think this is, this is our family and stuff. But like, we should have had a moment of that, like where they're saying, hey, let's get together and do movie night. She's like, this is just a job,
right.
I wish that there had been like maybe one or two more moments like that. That could have been like 2 or 3 panels just to give us a situation where we understand why each of the characters are not liking this person. Because obviously Elliot, that makes sense that they would be upset because it's a lack of respect of a person in general. But I almost wanted to see like her disrespect everybody to like really drive it home.
She like was nice to everybody and was actually, and then it would still make sense to me that they would hate her. But like, that was one of the parts where I talked about earlier that I wanted more in there because it felt rushed. That's definitely a part that felt rushed to me. The whole segment where they have this other person take the place of a really important crew member.
Yeah, but I think to that point though, I did like that the team kind of came together. Like it was proof that they were a family and that they weren't going to let one person's disrespect get let go. Right. If it's you insult one of us, you insult all of us, kind of thing. And I found that to be really important in the story.
I agree. I think another point like that for me was when Grace at the end does go with them with very little hemming and hawing. She's just like, yeah, sure, I'll abandon all my family and everyone I know and love and maybe never see them again. I haven't seen you in 5 years, but like, whatevs. Like that felt very like, I almost would have liked the ending better if she said no and it was just a goodbye.
Yeah.
But
for
going,
and
with that, if they like made it make sense, like her talking to her sisters about like, I don't know, I think this might be right for me. And like just the whole thinking about it versus just like, yeah, sure, here we go.
Yeah, it's a problem. I think that I think you kind of write yourself into a corner of where obviously things are very rushed. Like this place is falling apart and being above ground is dangerous. So they can't spend a lot of time thinking about it. So it needs to be a split decision. But yeah, I definitely agree with you on that. Kait, did you have any thoughts about like the first 2/3 of the book in terms of like characters growing together and all that stuff? Because I do want to talk about like the last third and the reconciliation and all that stuff that happens. But before we get into that, I want to make sure we've covered at least the first 2/3.
Yeah. I feel pretty much the same way as you guys. I feel like it was also done really effectively. Like, I mean, I feel like if I had been a panel by panel reader online as it was coming out, I would have felt kind of a little bit of disappointment or maybe whiplash, because there is a point in the story where it just suddenly changes to focus on the backstory in the boarding house or the school or whatever. And I feel like if I had been a reader online, I might have gotten sick of that and missed our characters from the current timeline, the ship, because you get so attached to them, and then suddenly the story isn't about that for a little while.
Yeah.
But reading it cover to cover in 2 sittings, I just breezed pretty much through the whole thing. So I just feel like it was done really effectively, where you get attached to all of these characters at different times in the book for different reasons, and then they're all connected by Mia or Maya. And yeah, I think it was a really good setup for the third.
Yeah, and I mean that final third where the book takes a sudden left turn in a lot of ways, or maybe that's what it was building towards. So it wasn't really a left turn so much, but Mia breaking down and telling everybody basically what happened, and they're all being very upset and feeling for her, I felt was like a true sign of camaraderie and honesty among friends that I love the way that it's portrayed. Like this group of people, they're so close to each other that they would feel just as upset as Mia does about what had happened just from her telling a story. And that the whole moment where she where Mia is, telling the story, and she cuts back, and they're all crying, and it was just a very, very nice moment. And they all decide, yeah, we're fucking going to do this because Elliot knows what's happening out here, and we know that we can get there because we've been there before. I thought it was a pretty fun reveal that Grace hired Char and Alma to, basically her family hired Char and Alma to get her to this school to learn, which in hindsight, is kind of a thing that her mom was pushing to say, hey, this girl, she needs to go see the world. And that's important for her. And that's something that she wants to do, which kind of makes the decision that she makes at the end a little bit make a little bit more sense, where she wanted to go out and see the universe in order to write about it because she wanted to be a writer. But nonetheless, I like that, we got that whole bit, and the whole point of the story that she's telling everybody that, she didn't get a chance to say goodbye because this bully had locked her in some room. Like, it was so tragic, and it really made me just angry in the moment as I was reading it, because I knew what was coming. And that moment where Grace is sitting there and she's crying and she's saying, no, just give her another minute, she's gonna come say goodbye, and her sisters are like, no, we have to go right now. It was just heart-wrenching. And I like that moment led immediately into the present day in the story of them saying, okay, we've got to fucking go to the staircase, we need to plan to do this. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, I like that too. I will say that it didn't, that was another point that made less sense to me later in the story when I was looking at it. I was like, well, why would they send Grace to this school in the first place? Doesn't feel like it was actually articulated very much, if at all, because It's like, we're risking our child's life, breaking the law, and we didn't do this for any of our other children, as far as I can tell. And so we clearly have some education system here. Why are we doing this with our child and risking never seeing her again? Like, that whole thing just didn't make sense to me.
Yeah, it was kind of vague, but I think Grace explains that there was some sort of agreement worked out, right? Because her parents, or her mom, right, is the head of this government, essentially, right? Because she is the matriarch.
Their own rule.
Yeah, and so they worked something out with the school, and that's why Grace had her own special room and all this other stuff. She couldn't get in trouble because they didn't want to risk retaliation from the staircase, which kind of begs the question of how much power do these people have, that they can kind of put this girl in this place where she can almost do no wrong because they are worried about some sort of retaliation from the family. So again, this is one of those things where I would read another 150 pages just to understand the dynamics of this universe, but it wasn't necessary for the story to tell the story of Mia and Grace. That's the thing. And
that goes back to the point of, we really only learn about the parts that Grace would care about. And I don't think Grace's big concern is, why did your parents let you come or make you decide to have you go to this school in the first place? It's, why are you leaving? How do I see you again? Yeah. I think Mia, not questioning a lot of that stuff until the very end is kind of a sign of her character of I don't care, Backstreet Boys, I don't care who you are, where you're from, as long as you love me, kind of thing. Okay, well, that's our show.
Come on. But yeah, I mean, the story does turn into a bit more action oriented, kind of there's suddenly a pressure on, which is quite a change in pace from the first 2/3 of the book, as Mia decides, hey, we got to go see this. I need to say goodbye to her. And by the end of it, I think it's very even when they go to visit Char on the planet, and she's got this whole beautiful lush greenery place where they live. Do people just live on their own planets or something? That was my question, but I ignored it. I really liked that Audrey was very excited. She's like, oh my gosh, grass. And I think that's the first time in the story we see any shade of green, true green that's not mixed with blue. It's a very clear definition of a different type of place that they're at. The staircase is very rocky, and it seems to be covered in some sort of red rock. And the academy is all blues and whites. That means that I took to be it's very clean, and it's very lit by fluorescent lights and things like that. But the planet that Char is on, or wherever she's staying is her home, is this lush green Earth-like world. And it's just a small showing of the range of whatever this universe is that the story takes place in. And I thought that it was very interesting that it was so unique for just Char's planet to have grass. That yeah, I really dug it. But the thing that I wanted to get to with the last third was like, suddenly all of our characters in the last third of the book have very different roles, right? Mia is trying to go find Grace. Elliot's backstory is revealed, and their backstory is wild. They had, before I get to it, whatever, and all of a sudden Audrey becomes like this, falls into this place where she meets like a fucking spirit god or something, and becomes like a speaker for it for a moment. And Char and Alma have to kind of deal with their underlying issues that they have between, Alma wanting to have this life of adventure and Char wanting to do things by the book because it's safe. And they have to find a balance between that. I thought that the sudden switch was interesting, and it didn't feel like, it was very abrupt, but it didn't feel like out of character for anyone to be in these positions, right? Like Audrey was the type of person that would go explore. Mia only cares about what her heart is thinking. Char and Alma need to figure out what the fuck is happening between the two of them, because obviously, as much as they love each other, they clearly have some issues that they need to work out, and they refuse to actually settle them, or are, in the case of this book, interrupted while they're trying to have those discussions. I really like the change, though it was very, very abrupt. I wanted to hear what you guys thought about that.
I liked it a lot. I liked the getting the backstory for more characters and seeing more development there.
I was very worried that Audrey was going to die at the end. Like, yeah. I don't know about you guys.
Yeah.
She got to go talk to this cool giant wolf, but at what cost? Question mark. That's all I could think of.
Yeah, I liked the kind of speeding up as the stakes got higher. I thought that it played really well as a climax to the series and to the book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I guess I don't know. I like I've said a million times, I like the way that this book went. I thought that the ramp up at the end was really, really cool. And I enjoyed the ending. Like, I felt like the book had a very satisfying ending, all things considered. But yeah, did you guys have any last thoughts about this before we wrap up here?
No,
I just want to read more Tillie Walden at this point.
That was exactly what I was going to say, Kate. I already have placed the hold order from my library. And of course, they're all like, other people already have them checked out, but put them on hold for my library that's doing curbside pickup now, so that we can get library books, even though the library isn't open to the public. So yeah, I especially want to read the one about figure skating that she has.
Is that Spinning, I think is what it was? Yeah, I've heard only stupendous things about that. But yeah, well, I guess, if you we'd love to hear what everybody else thinks about this. We did have some comments on the Goodreads thread, but no one said it was okay to air. So make sure if you're going to go on Goodreads, you're going to comment, post okay to air. But thank you to everyone who had a chance to read this.
Air. I mean, it's totally cool to also talk and not want your stuff read.
That's true. If you want to come and chat with us, this was a huge book, but I'm very glad that we got a chance to read it, because I know that this was like an award-winning book, or at least award-nominated book. And Tillie Walden is a very respected, creator. I think she's done some amazing work, and I can't wait to read more of her stuff. But yeah, beyond that, I guess thank you, Kait and Kate, for being on the show. You can follow us all on the internet. You can follow Kait at Kait Elfear. You can follow me at Mike Rappin, and you can follow the show at IRCB Podcast on Instagram and on Twitter. And Kate, I don't know if you were using your Twitter. I don't remember if it was on or off or whatever, but
for a hot second, it's private again.
This show and our mini subscriber-only podcasts are powered by fans like you on Patreon. Join now at patreon.com/IRCB Podcast.
If you haven't already, please rate and review our show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also join us on Discord at ircbpodcast.com/Discord, and make sure to tell a friend or two about the show.
Infinity Shred is the best band in the universe. They do all the music for our show. We love them to death. Xander is a very cool guy. He is a fantastic GM, and he's also the editor of our show. Thank you so much to Xander for all the work that he does. I want to say thanks to Kait and Kate for being on the episode. I want to say thank you to everyone out there who listens to the show. It means the world to us that you spend time with us as we get closer to episode 300. I can't believe it. Until next time, though, stay healthy, comics are good, and so are you.